The chair lays out on second reading House Bill 796. The clerk will read the bill.
HB number 796 by Bell of Montgomery relating to the Texas Sovereignty Act.
The chair recognizes Mr. Bell of Montgomery to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, right now we have as a state no way of knowing why we take the actions we take whenever we perceive that the federal government has acted in a manner that we don't agree with, or maybe we do agree with. It doesn't matter. We still have no mechanism or manner in order to understand why the state does what it does. House Bill 796, the Texas Sovereignty Act, addresses the power of the federal government and gives that power back to the state in making certain that we have a process whereby to go through the constitutional enforcement aspects of things that might affect the sovereignty of our state to determine if indeed the act is deemed by the state to be constitutional. It creates a permanent joint committee of the legislature, which has 6 members from the House, 6 members from the Senate, 4 members from the majority party of either of those bodies as a standard. And they serve 2 terms, or serve a 2-year term that aligns with our biennium, our service as elected members. In the event that people who have standing, which is elected officials, county officials, judges, and others, determine that an action might be questionable, then those members would be able to submit that to the committee. And the committee would then work through the process very much the same way we work through bills. And ultimately, each of the bodies, each of the chambers would have to determine if we thought that Texas should or should not follow that directive. And the result of that would be a vote that would carry it to the governor's desk for approval or disapproval.
Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Goodwin, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I would yield for a question.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you. Representative, what authority does the committee have if it finds something that's unconstitutional?
So if the committee finds something to be unconstitutional, effectively, it has the same standing we've always had. We just will have clarity on why we're taking the steps we're taking. Texas today has situations where we are not acting consistent with Supreme Court rulings and other scenarios where we've done things that we can't explain why we take those steps. This just creates a process and procedure so that we as Texans will know why we do the things we do when Texas elects to take those steps. Right now, there is no process. We simply either do or do not do those things that are presented to us by executive order, by SCOTUS, by other edicts. So we do not, as an absolute certainty, follow those guidelines.
So this new process that you're describing, is that essentially a backdoor to passing a bill?
A backdoor to passing a bill?
Right. It requires a majority vote of both chambers. Isn't that essentially a backdoor to passing a bill?
If indeed it became a bill, it would be because we were in session. Ultimately, for this process to culminate, it goes with us in session, in which case we would have the authority to pass a bill, which would then go through that process. It would not be a backdoor. It would be our normal legislative process in the event that occurred.
Doesn't this bill undercut the authority of the Attorney General? Because isn't the Attorney General charged with defending the state against unconstitutional laws that impact our state?
It does not undermine the Attorney General at all. In fact, it leaves them in the same defense position they've always held. What it does do is provides support for any action the Attorney General might elect to take based on an understanding of where this body finds that instance to be, whatever that is that's being challenged, that the Attorney General would have the value of the work of this body and our counterparts across the rotunda.
Don't you think this bill is unconstitutional because it blurs the line between the judicial and the legislative?
I do not think it is unconstitutional at all. In fact, I think if you read the Constitution, the federal government has those powers that were enumerated to us, all others being reserved to the states and to the citizens. So when there are situations where we find ourselves challenged by whether or not the actions and conduct fall within those constraints. This just provides a process whereby we can understand why we act the way we act. Because we, throughout history, have always either complied or not complied, but throughout history, we've never had a benchmark or a basis or a process whereby any Texan could look at another Texan and say, this is why we do what we do. This bill simply provides that foundation.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Gomez, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman yield
Will
for
the gentleman yield for
questions?
questions?
Would yield for a question.
The gentleman yields.
Representative, good afternoon. I'm trying to understand, I appreciate the novelty of this bill in light of the tumultuous times we're facing right now at the federal level. So would you explain to me a minute, this bill creates a new committee. Would you explain where this committee comes from, how this committee is selected?
So the committee is appointed by the Speaker and by the Lieutenant Governor. So it's this body that is created. We have permanent standing committees much like this already in existence. It creates that. It allows for a process with clear certainty of what do we do when we have questions about issues or matters that originate at a federal level that we're not certain why we as Texans are taking.
So to be
this
clear,
step.
it's 8 members of the House and 8 members of the Senate, correct?
I believe it is 6 of each.
6 and 6? Okay, do those members, do they have to be elected by the people?
To serve on this committee, they all have to be elected. They are members of this body or our Senate.
Are there any prerequisites that these individuals have to be licensed attorneys in the state of Texas?
They only have to be elected and serve in this body or our counterpart in the legislative body.
So there's no prerequisites that these individuals have to have any legal training whatsoever or be licensed to practice federal law?
The standard is just the same as for you or I to be elected.
Right. So you keep referencing other committees. What other committees do we currently have right now that have unilateral authority to override federal jurisdiction?
When I spoke about other committees, we have other standing committees, not speaking specific to
What standing committees do we have right now that can, I believe you said, unilaterally declare federal law unconstitutional?
As I said a moment ago, and in direct answer to your question, didn't say we had any other committees standing in
Okay, so
exactly
there are
the same
none.
manner.
This is novel. This is the first of its
As
kind.
far as a committee for this purpose, to my knowledge, it would be a novel committee.
Okay, and so I'm trying to understand the jurisdictional constraints of this committee. For example, when President Trump unilaterally declared there will be tariffs, if the state of Texas, if this committee were to disagree with that declaration, could this committee find that the issuance of those tariffs are unconstitutional?
So as with any other executive order or any other action, if Texas elected to not act, and I don't find a likelihood or a possibility that that would be the case, but if indeed there was a process where any president at any time in history had issued an edict that differed from the perception of Texans, it would allow us as Texans in this generation and in future generations to understand why we stood where we stand.
I believe, and respectfully, your bill doesn't say differs from the opinion of Texans. Your bill states violates the Constitution, correct? So it's not our opinion. It's that of these non-lawyers, these non-judges, declaring what is constitutional versus what is not, correct?
You don't have to be an attorney to read the Constitution. Thankfully, it's written in a language and pretty straightforward. So,
for example, recently when the president, issued an executive order that affected over 5,000 jobs in South Texas, for example, in Southwest Key from one day to the next, if this committee were to have found that executive order to be unconstitutional, what then would happen?
So the only way this committee would even take action would be if somebody who had standing determined that they felt like it was an action that was outside of the framework of the federal government.
Who
the
has
Constitution.
standing under this bill?
So it's identified, I could read them all, but it's basically elected officials like us. It is the Attorney General, it is elected officials in counties, it's county officials. There's a list that's in the bill. I'll read them if you would like for me to.
And you'd agree with me that historically, ordinarily, the natural course of business when anyone with standing under the federal rules of procedure takes issue with the constitutionality of an executive order, the ordinary due process for that would be to file suit in federal court, would it not?
So there have been lawsuits filed on executive orders. That is a correct statement.
in federal. So this bill, in essence, essentially bypasses that requirement of federal jurisdiction.
I would tell you that this bill simply explains why Texas does what it does. We don't have to have a lawsuit not to do what is said or to do what is said. We simply act. And right now, the purpose of this particular bill is so that when generations in the future look back to figure out why we do what we do, we have a process and a procedure that we can point to that said, this is why we acted in the manner we acted.
And it's your opinion, despite the fact there being no other committees that have this similar power, you don't believe that you're creating essentially a fourth branch of government that acts in a judicial capacity to interpret federal law?
It is absolutely not creating a fourth branch of government. It is creating a committee to run it through the same process that we run through anything else when we evaluate. But it would explain to Texans why we do what we do. And there are circumstances where we are already, our statutes say one thing, the Supreme Court says something that agrees with it, and we don't comply. So, but you can't and I can't tell anyone why we do what we do. This bill simply seeks to put in place a process whereby when we elect to act as Texas, that we can look backwards or forward and determine why we took the courses of action that we took. It won't be random. It'll have a process that says, why did we do it?
Respectfully, Representative, I believe that is squarely dictated in both the federal and state constitutions, squarely within the jurisdiction and the purview of the judicial branch. Thank you.
I respect your opinion. Thank you.
Mr. Bryant, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise a point of order against further consideration of House Bill 796 under Rule 8, Section 1A on the grounds that the caption fails to give reasonable notice of the subject of the proposed measure.
Please bring your point of order down front.